We're now going to code our get meal view. So we'll go ahead and create a new class. So we're going to call this get meal. It's going to be a template view. I'll just add in a doc string. Okay. We're then going to give it a template name. So that is going to be our meal planner create meal.html page. We're then going to define our get context data function. We'll pass in self and our keyword arguments. So we'll get the calories first. That will be the self.request.get, because it's a get method, and we're going to get the calories input. We'll then go ahead and get our query. So again, we're going to get the search input box. We're then going to check if there's a query. So because we don't want to have to do if there's a query and calories and else there's calories, what we're actually going to do here is we're going to check if there's not calories. So if there's not calories, then we don't care about them. So we'll give it a ridiculous number of 9,999. Then if there is calories, we're going to equal that to the calories, but we're going to cast it into an integer. Now, if we didn't use the if not calories and we tried to cast it to an int, the application would crash because it's null, basically. We can't convert null into an integer. So the next thing that we need to do then is we need to filter our recipes. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to import our queue objects so that we can do some advanced filtering. So from Django.db.models import queue. So we're then going to say our recipes are equal to our recipe.objects.filter. So we're going to have a query for the description. So if the description contains the query, now we're just going to copy this because we're going to be doing quite a lot of them. So we're going to check the description, the title, the ingredients, the cuisine type, and the instructions. So we're going to use the or, so the pipe character, because we're going to say if it's in any of these. So I'll just paste that across. We'll change description for title. We'll do one more and we'll change this for the ingredients. We'll create another or, new line, paste it again. We'll change this for our cuisine type and another or for our instructions. So this time we're going to use the and, so the ampersand, and we're actually going to do something slightly different. So we're going to say if it's any of these things and it has calories _LTE for less than or equal to the calories specified, and the meal type equals to our keyword arguments. So we're going to send the actual meal type in through the URL, so we'll have access to that. So that's going to be meal type. Okay, so we also need to go ahead and actually import our recipes. So at the top under here, we'll say from recipes.models import recipe. So the next thing we're going to do then is we're going to say elif calories. Okay, so this is only if there was calories sent. then we're going to do another filter. So we'll say recipes is equal to our recipe.objects.filter. And this time we're going to say calories double _ LTE for less than or equal to calories, and meal type is equal to our keyword args meal type. So if we have a query, we'll go ahead and we'll filter those. If we have calories, then we'll filter those. Now we're going to finalize that with an else statement. So if there was no query actually sent, we're going to generate a random object. So we'll first do a check and we'll say if the length of the recipe.objects.all is less than 1, we're going to set our recipes as an empty list because we need to check later if there's actually any recipes in the database at all. So if it is less than 1, we'll have an empty list. Else, we're going to get a random recipe for that meal type. So we'll say recipes is equal to recipe.objects.filter, and we're just going to say meal type equals our keyword args of meal type. We're then going to come out of that if statement and we're going to create another one. So we want to check if the length of the recipes is greater than 0. So we're going to get a random one here. So what we actually need to do is at the top, we need to come in here and we need to import random. So if the length of the recipes is greater than 0, then our recipe is going to be equals to a random. We're going to use the choice function and we're going to pass in the recipes. Then we're going to create a new context object. We're going to send back the meal date. Okay, and that is going to be equals to our keyword argument. So when we initially call the function, we're going to pass these over via the URL pattern to this view. So we'll use our keyword args and we'll have meal date. We're going to do the same thing for our meal type. So we'll have meal type. And then we're going to pass back our recipe. Okay, so then what we want to do then is if there is no recipes, we don't want to send a recipe back because obviously it's going to crash on the front end. So we're just going to return the context. So this time we're just going to return the meal date and the meal type. So we'll copy those three and we will add those into our context. Lastly, we will then return our context. So now that we have this done, we need to go ahead and we need to actually create our add meal view as well. So we'll create a new class. This one's going to be called add meal. This one is just going to be a regular view because it doesn't actually have a template because we're just sending the form back to add it. So we'll go back up to the top and we will import our view. So we have template view and view. So for this one, we are only going to define a post method because the only thing that we're actually doing is posting that form back that we created. So we're going to override the default post method. So this requires self. We need to pass in args and we need to pass in quargs. So we're going to get the primary key. So the primary key for this is going to be our recipes primary key. So we're going to send that over the URL pattern. So we'll give that the PK. We're then going to go and find the recipe. So we're going to say our recipe is equal to recipe.objects.get. And that's going to say primary key is equal to primary key. So we then need to get our meal date, which again is going to be passed from our previous view with the URL pattern to this one. So we'll have our keyword args of our meal date, and we will have our meal type. The next thing that we need to do is either create or update it. So I'm going to have meal and created is what's going to be returned. This is going to be equal to our meal dot objects dot. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a built-in function. It's called update or create. So what this will do is it will first go and check the database, and it will say, does a record exist for this already? If it does, then update it. If not, create it. So we're going to pass in the parameters of the meal date, and that's going to be equal to our meal date. We're going to pass in our meal type, which is equal to our meal type. And then we're going to give it some defaults if it's creating it. So if we're creating a new one, it needs to have the user. So that's going to be the self.request.user. We're going to have to give it the recipe. So that will be the recipe that we've just passed in and found. And then we also need to give it a meal date. So the meal date is equal to our meal date. So I'm going to use a return here, and what we're going to return is a HTTP response redirect, and we're going to reverse the meal planner. So we need to go and actually import these, so we'll head on up to the top of the file. So from Django.http, we're going to import the HTTP response redirect, and then import reverse from Django.urls. So that should be those ones complete. So now all we need to do is go and update our URL patterns. So we're going to be passing quite a lot through with these. So we'll first go and import our views. So we have the get meal and the add meal. We'll then create a new path, the first one for our create meal. So this will be called create plan. Then we're going to pass in a string. So the string is going to be the meal date. And we're also going to pass back a string for the meal type. So we then need to tell it which view this is. So that's the get meal class, and we're going to render that as a view. And we will give it a name of get meals. We will then create a new path once again for our create meal. So we'll have create meal / and then we're going to pass in the string again of the meal date. We're going to pass in the string of our meal type. And we also this time need to pass in the primary key of our recipe so that we can find that. So we'll tell it which class we're using, so that's our add meal, and we want to render that as a view, and we will give it a name equals to add meal. So we just need to go up now back to our templates, and we need to update each of the anchors and buttons within them. So we have our buttons in here within our mealplanner.html. So now we need to pass in those URLs. So for the first one, we're going to give it a URL of get meals. And this one is going to take in our date, which is our day, and our meal type, which is going to be our breakfast. So we'll just copy this and we'll add that into each one and then update for lunch and dinner. We will then go ahead to our create meal and we need to update our forms action for actually adding the meal. So within here we will create our new URL and this is going to be our add meal. So if you remember, this one needs to take in the meal date, it needs to take in the meal type, and we also need the recipe's primary key. So we'll go ahead now and start up our run server. So we'll go ahead over to our profile, we'll select our meals, we'll go in here, we'll create a breakfast. So we have banana waffles here, so we add that. We can now see that's our breakfast. Now, if we wanted to add something specific for breakfast, lunch, or dinner that's not one of that type of meal, then we can search. For example, like if we find a random recipe, this is only going to bring up lunch ones. So if I wanted to add banana waffles, for example, I can find that recipe and I can add. And we go back in here. Okay, so we have breakfast and breakfast. So I think this is actually saved as our lunch, but we have a typo in the template. So if we just switch back to VS Code for a second, what I have done here is when I'm filtering the meals, so I'm doing the meal.recipe meal type. So because that's the actual recipe's meal type, it's always going to be equal breakfast. Whereas within our model, we've actually got this separately in our meal model. So it will be stored in for the meal type that we've selected. So in order to fix this, we just need to remove this recipe and we access the meal type directly. So if we just save that, we'll switch back and we'll refresh. So now we have our breakfast and our lunch. So we have dinner here. We'll just check in the admin panel and we'll see if we've got some that are in the same meal type category so that I can show the filtering. So we're going to recipes. We have one lunch, two lunches. Okay, so one is 300 and one is 600. So if we search for a maximum, so we'll go back to lunches. Sorry, we'll go to meals. We'll add a lunch and we'll say maximum calories 500. So we should only ever get one back here. Okay, so if we then say, if we allow for the 600, then we should get our carbonara back. So this concludes the code for our recipe planner.